In this video, we will be previewing the next string I plan to test out on court, and that is the Signum Pro Firestorm 1.30. So I'm going to go through a few of the stats that I pull up from the string performance database and go into a little bit of detail into why I chose this as the next string to feature on this channel. I will be putting the string in the Yonex SV98 Lite just because it makes it a little bit easier to compare with previous setups, see where we went right and where we went wrong.
When making a change to the setup, I try to keep the statistics as similar as possible to the previous setup. This is because it makes it easier to identify which variable is causing the difference in playing characteristics. If I've got stats all over the place, then it becomes very difficult, if not impossible, to pinpoint what statistics have caused the change in the performance of the setup. So that's why I try to keep the statistics as similar as possible, although obviously we need to make changes if we are going to enhance the performance of the previous setup.
With that in mind, just recapping on the previous analysis video, which involved the Head Metallics 2 racket with the Prince Tournament Nylon 1.38 string, I highlighted just how much length control this setup had, and when the balls were newer and they were zipping through the court or bouncing a little bit higher, taking the spin more efficiently, I felt that's when the setup was at its absolute peak, because the courts or the surface was gritty and slow enough for me to be able to utilize the high swing speed of the racket while not be pushed around from the heavy pace or spin or combination of both from my opponent. As the match went on and the balls got a bit slower, the conditions got a bit heavier, the rallies got more longer on a more consistent basis, and I did find it more difficult to hit through my opponent. I mean, that's going to happen pretty much no matter what your setup is, but it did cross my mind during the match that perhaps I could sacrifice a little bit of height width trajectory control, because I seem to not have too much of a problem in that regards, and try to gain even more length control so I can hit out and take control of the point on a more consistent basis with those older balls. So that's the basis of this video.
Let's get into some of these stats for this string, and I'm going to start off with the stiffness, which at reference tension of 51 pounds came in at 185.7 pounds. So in comparison to the previous string that we used, the Tournament Nylon, which came in at 186.9 pounds, we've got a slight decrease, which should give us more feel and an increase in length control, but comes at the cost of a decrease in height width and trajectory control. So kind of what I was looking for in my previous statement. We won't see a massive difference. It is just 1.2 pounds in difference, but it still is noticeable out on court, especially if you are sensitive to setup changes.
If we go across and look at the dwell time at 36.3 milliseconds, that's a massive increase on the 33.6 milliseconds that we had with the Prince Tournament Nylon string. And that extra dwell time, again, that gives you more length control. In this case, it's going to give us a lot more length control because that's a big increase. But that longer dwell time does mean that on average, we are going to have a much higher launch angle. So in the past, when I've used strings that have long dwell times, I found it's impossible to use them effectively with dampeners, because the dampener adds a little bit of shot speed, and that combination with the longer dwell time makes it very difficult to control the length. So even though you've got a soft feeling string that does feel comfortable, and the dampener does jam the strings a little bit so you get a bit more height and width control, trajectory control, the increase in errors from the lack of length control is substantial and it can't be overcome. So with that experience, I'm going to take this string out onto court with no dampener, and I'm going to try and fully utilize the extra length control
being provided by the string through the increase in dwell time and decrease in stiffness, alongside the increase in swing speed being provided to us by the Yonex SV98 Lite. So in theory, we should be able to achieve a lot more spin on average with pretty much every stroke we're playing, but it does come at the cost of a decrease in trajectory control because we're not using a dampener. There will be more string movement, and the stiffness being lower inherently is going to cause a little bit more string movement as well. So if we can keep that under control, in theory, we should be able to hit with a much higher average spin rate on all of our strokes in comparison to our previous setup, which was the Head Metallics 2 with the Prince Tournament nylon. But we'll have to see how it performs out on court.
Okay, on to the deflection, which came in at 33.1 millimeters. That's a little on the higher end of the scale. And usually with higher deflection, you'd experience lower height, width, and just general overall trajectory control. In theory, you should have more access to snapback, which is when the main string moves on the crosses and then they snap back, imparting more spin on the ball. But I find this to be a little bit hit and miss, as most strings, as they wear the outer coating off, they tend to get stuck a little bit more on the cross strings and they don't snap back as efficiently as they do when they're brand new with the coating on. So it's not something I really look for when I'm trying to add snapback into a setup. In fact, I don't look for snapback in a setup at all, as generally it's not reliable, especially in the long term. And if you're going to use these strings for, more than 3 to 4 hours, you're going to experience a decline in the snapback no matter what. That's why I tend to ignore the use of snapback. But yeah, anyway, a deflection of 33.1, again on the higher end of the scale. So we're looking at a little bit more length control at the cost of less trajectory control. Hopefully the racket will give us enough control in that department to counterbalance it, but we're going to find out on court
exactly how efficient it is at maintaining height and trajectory control.
Now, I have used this string in the past, so I'm cheating a little bit with my preview. I kind of know what to expect.
Hence why I know not to use a dampener with this string.
Also, I've found out in the past that it generally does not perform well in rackets that are heavier and slow your swing speed down, as the main strength of this setup is its length control and the extra spin you can impart with that extra length control. And if you want to impart extra spin, you're going to need a racket that you can swing quickly. Hence why I've chosen the SV98 Lite, as it's got quite a high swing speed at 50.1 miles an hour. I could, in theory, go a lot higher than that, but I think this is a decent starting point. And we'll see how we go if I can impart enough
spin to make this setup change a success. Okay, that brings us to the end of this setup preview. I want to thank everyone for watching. I do appreciate it, as always. And if you enjoyed it, it might be worth checking out the other videos on this channel or staying tuned for future content that will be releasing soon. So hopefully I'll see you all there. And until then, everyone, take care.